All right, Ruth chapter 2. Ruth chapter 2 is probably uh, the most beautiful chapter in the Old Testament when it comes to understanding and visualizing God's grace. Because recall what the Old Testament is. The Old Testament, at its core, is a story about the Messiah, is a story about Christ and what Christ would do. That's why Jesus tells the Pharisees, if you believe Moses, right, you've put your hope in Moses, but if you believe Moses, you will believe me because Moses wrote about me. In other words, what Jesus is saying is the entire Old Testament is about him. We see that is the case in the way that the apostles and the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter, all of them, the way that they handled the Old Testament scriptures. They took and they take the Old Testament scriptures and they apply it to Christ. And they show us how Christ is found in the Old Testament pages. And I said a couple weeks ago, we didn't have this last week, but the week prior to that, in chapter 1 of Ruth, I said, I want you to understand the book of Ruth in this way, that Boaz, the hero of the story, is symbolic, is a type, is a shadow of Christ. In other words, the actions of Boaz and what Boaz does in the story on a spiritual level is what Christ does for us. The Gentile church is going to be Ruth in the story, and Naomi is going to be the nation of Israel in the story. That is the prophetic understanding of the book of Ruth. And like I said, chapter 2 is a chapter about the grace of God and how that works. So is there any questions as we approach chapter 2 of the book of Ruth? Everybody remember what has happened so far? Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons have moved during there was a famine that came across the land in Bethlehem, and Elimelech, instead of staying there and sticking it out, fled with his family to Moab. Moab, they were enemies of the nation of Israel, so Elimelech and Naomi fled to the enemies of Israel, and they stayed there. And while they were there, Elimelech died, and Naomi took for the two sons daughters from the people of Moab, Orpah and Ruth, and then the two sons died. And then Naomi has decided she's going to go back to Bethlehem, and initially both daughter-in-laws say they're going to go with her, but she convinces Orpah to go back to her people and her God. And Ruth, on the other hand, in her association with Naomi's family, however little that Naomi and her sons continued to worship God, continued to celebrate the things of God, maybe they still kept the Sabbath day. I'm not sure, but somehow Ruth was impressed, and Ruth was introduced to the God of Israel. She was introduced to Naomi's God, and she has come to believe in Naomi's God. So then we have that beautiful thing that Ruth says when Naomi continues to urge her to go home, because Naomi does not want to show up in Bethlehem with this Moabite widow, because the people in Israel did not like the Moabites, and it would be a reminder to the people around Naomi and the people in Bethlehem that Naomi had deserted them and went over to the Moabites. So in verse 15, Naomi says, and see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. She's talking to Ruth. And here's Ruth's response. And we see in Ruth's response in verse 16 and following of chapter 1 that Ruth has become a believer in the God of Israel. She says, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord, may Jehovah, do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said, no more. And so Naomi and Ruth make the journey back to Bethlehem, And Naomi makes that great statement, do not call me Naomi, because God has treated me bitterly. Call me Mara, or Mara, for the Lord has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Naomi has completely given up on God. Chapter 2, we see that God has not forgotten about her, that God is not going to leave her empty, that God has indeed provided a means of redemption for not just Ruth, but Naomi. So, chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. A worthy man, if you're using a New King James, it might say a wealthy man. The underlying word does mean wealth, but the word can also mean a mighty soldier, a mighty person, one of high esteem. So you can look at Boaz was somebody who had some wealth, and Boaz was somebody who was very well respected in the community. And here the author seems to be drawing a contrast between Elimelech, who, when tough times hit, ran out on the people of Israel, ran out of the people of Bethlehem, and fled to their enemies, to the Moabites. Boaz, on the other hand, stuck it out during the tough times. And why? Because he stuck it out during the tough times, he has been reckoned as a mighty, a wealthy man, a worthy man in the community, somebody that the community looked up to. We see in the story, as we're going to read in a few minutes, he has multiple fields of grain that he owns, and he has multiple servants that are working those fields. So Boaz is a somebody in the community, right? He's somebody who not only survived during the famine, he seems to have prospered during the famine. God has prospered him during the famine. So now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And here's your freebie for today. Boaz is one of the absolutely very few Hebrew words in the scripture that we actually pronounce correctly. When you pronounce it in the Hebrew, it's Boaz. The emphasis is on the as opposed to the bo, but it's said just like we pronounce it. So that's very rare when you try to look at the way the Hebrew is pronounced. But Boaz is one of those words that we are pronouncing as they would have pronounced it. And like I said, that's your freebie for today. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So Ruth has the idea. Look, she's here with her mother-in-law. She's a widow. They're both widows. They have no means of support. They have no means of income. They have no way to provide for themselves, except for, apparently Ruth has been taught that in the law of God, God had placed a provision in the law that forbade people from harvesting every last morsel of grain from their grain fields. They were to leave the fringes of the field. They were to leave the edges of the field. If they dropped some seeds, they were to leave that for the destitute and for the poor who had the right to come along and glean in the fields to find their sustenance. It was not a glamorous thing to do. It was something that the very poor, the beggars of the nation, had to do. They had to go and pick at the leavings of the harvesters, right? So it was a very difficult thing to do. You're in essence spending all day bent over, looking in the dirt, in the mud, and in the stubble, trying to find the heads of grain that may have fell from the harvester's basket or whatever. So it was not an easy thing to do, but this is Ruth's plan. Ruth is willing to humble herself. She's willing to take on the demeanor of a beggar, because I don't know if I mentioned it, but when Ruth decided she was going to follow Naomi back to the nation of Israel, back to Bethlehem, she was in essence giving up her future. She was not going to be able to find a husband who was willing to take a Moabite widow. She was giving up any prospect other than the fact that she was going to go to the land of Jehovah. That's the entire thing that is driving Ruth. But because she has become a believer in Jehovah, she is willing to submit herself and become as a lowest servant in order to serve her mother-in-law, in order to feed her mother-in-law. So she says, let me go glean in whoever's field will let me. In essence, that's what she just said. She says, let me go glean. Let me go to the field and glean the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. She has no idea who Boaz is. Naomi doesn't say, go to Boaz's field. Naomi's not thinking anything about Boaz at this moment in time. She, in essence, has said that God has given up on her. She's not looking to be redeemed. She's not expecting to be redeemed. But, so she says to Ruth, and she, being Naomi, said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. She just so happened to come into the field belonging to Boaz. This is a God-appointed thing that she comes to Boaz's field, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. First thing we hear from Boaz, the first words from Boaz's mouth, is he's bringing a blessing to the people who are working for him. He's not coming mightier than thou. He's not coming to remind them that he is the master and they are the servants. He brings a blessing from the Lord. In this we see that Boaz, probably the reason that he has become a mighty man, a worthy man in the community, is that he is a godly man. His first thoughts are to bring a blessing to those that serve him, that work for him. So he says, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. So we see his interaction with his workers. And of course, we have to infer a lot of this from the paucity of the text. It's not a lot of words, but we see that the reason the writer brings the very first words out of Boaz's mouth is because everything that flows from this, everything that flows in the story, is because Boaz is a godly man and because Ruth has sought refuge with God in the nation of Israel. So, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to the young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? He sees Ruth, and we're not told what Ruth looks like, right? Every picture you see of Ruth in the picture Bibles or whatever shows her as a beautiful young woman. Scripture doesn't say that. Scripture says nothing about her looks whatsoever. But we tend to read this from our romantic Western mindset, and we see it as a love story. It's not primarily a love story, especially at this point in the story. So we see Boaz as a godly man, and he sees this young woman who is reaping. And he says, whose woman is this? Because in that day and age, a woman would have had a man who was responsible for her. A woman would have had a husband or a father who was responsible for her. So Boaz sees this unattached young woman who has joined the gleaners. And he immediately, because I think he is a godly man, he has a concern, because here's a woman who has no protection. Here's a woman who has no man to protect her. So he asked the question, whose woman is this? Whose young woman is this? Who does she belong to? Right? Who, in other words, Boaz's question is this: who is responsible for this young woman? Who is her protector? Who is the one that is going to protect and provide for this young woman? Because he sees her out there gleaning, which is telling him that there's something not right about this young woman's situation. And as a godly man, he wants to make sure that she is going to be safe and all of that. So he says, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So not only did Naomi or Ruth decide to come glean, which was, according to the law, every person's right. Every person could go and glean in the field, but she just didn't presume that they would allow her to glean. She asked for permission. So we see the humility of Ruth in this interaction. So we see the godliness of Boaz and the humility of Ruth. So she came and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz says to Ruth, so Boaz goes up to Ruth and says these words. Now listen, my daughter. Boaz is immediately identifying himself as someone who is willing to protect this young woman. He's not looking at her as a future spouse. He's not looking at her as a future love conquest. He says, listen, my daughter. In other words, he's setting himself up as her protector. Listen, my daughter. Do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? Okay, so Boaz steps up when he finds out who she is, and he understands. He says to the servant, whose young woman is this? The servant says, this is the Moabitess who came back with Naomi. Now, Boaz knows who Naomi is. He's heard the story of Naomi and Ruth, and he now understands that this young woman does not have a protector. This young woman has no husband. This young woman has no father. This young woman has no man to step up and protect her. So the first act we see of Boaz is that he is going to step up and become the protector of this young woman, right? He says, you stay in my field. You glean where my young women don't go anywhere else. You stay in the fields that belong to me. I have told my servants, my male servants, don't touch you. They are not going to harm you. You will be safe if you stay in my fields. You can drink whatever my young men draw up to drink, but you need to stay in these fields. He is now stepped up to become her protector. Because in that day and age, and I don't want to upset the ladies, but in that day and age, if a woman didn't have a man, she was in a grave situation. She was in dire straits if there was not a man in her life, either a husband, a father, or a son, to take care of the women. It's just the way it was back in those days. And Boaz has seen this young woman who came home and accompanied Naomi back to the land of Israel. And he says, I'm going to step up and perform the duty of her protector. Now, and then she says the words that we should all say when we contemplate what God has done for us. Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner, or since I am a sinner? That's what we should say. But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. What all has she done for her mother-in-law? She has accompanied her mother-in-law because she has now become a believer in Jehovah, so she is going to live in the land of Jehovah, and she's going to serve Naomi until she dies. She has tied herself to Naomi because of Naomi's God. And so Boaz says, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know. And here is what Boaz's ultimate driver. This is what is causing Boaz to act as he's doing. The Lord repay you, verse 12, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Why is Boaz stepping up to protect this young woman? Because he is a godly man, and she has sought refuge under the wings of the Lord. She has sought refuge in the land of Jehovah. And Boaz said, I'm not the one who is taking notice of you. The God in whose land you have come to seek refuge is taking notice of you. He's just using me to do that for you. So the blessings that I'm bestowing on you are the blessings of God. I'm just the vessel that the blessings are flowing through. So he gives the reason why he has taken notice of her. He gives the reason why he has stepped up to be her protector. He has given the reason on why he is going to bless her. And as we're going to see in just a minute, he's going to do more than bless her. He is going to pour abundant grace out upon her. And the reason is because she has sought refuge under the wings of God. And that's the same thing that Jesus does for us. Why has he taken refuge? Why has he taken notice of us? It's because we have seeking refuge under the wings of God. We have recognized our need for God, so we have sought refuge with God. And so Jesus has taken notice of us, just like Boaz took notice of Ruth and taken care of her. Then she said, verse 13, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. Do you understand how out of character this is for that day and age? Number one, she's not even one of his servants. She's below his servants. She's a gleaner. She's one of the poor. And yet Boaz says, you come sit down at the table with us and you eat with us. And not only does he do that, Boaz himself serves her. Now, the servants typically would not eat with the master. The master would eat, and the servants could eat. But Boaz has reversed that. He sits down with his servants and then invites this Moabite widow to sit at the table, and he himself serves her, and he serves her in abundance. It says she ate her fill, and she had some left over. She was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, and I want you to notice the amazing grace that Boaz pours out upon this woman, simply because she has sought refuge under the arms of God, and God is using Boaz as a means, as a vehicle of his grace, right? Just as he has used Jesus to pour his grace out upon us. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, right? Don't restrict her to the edges of the field. You let her walk in the middle of the field. Let her glean among the sheaves. And do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean. And do not rebuke her. So take some of the stuff that you have harvested and put it down on the ground so she can have that as well. And don't say a word. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. Do the math, that comes out to about 30 pounds. She got about 30 pounds of grain in that one day of gleaning, which is astounding. And it's because Boaz instructed his young men to assist her by strategically placing the grain where she could glean it. About an ephah of barley. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, and whose kindness has not forsaken the living. May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness, the Lord's kindness, has not forsaken the living or the dead. Chapter 1, she is saying the Lord has forgotten her and forsaken her, and now Naomi knows that the Lord has not forsaken her, that he guided her daughter-in-law to the fields of Boaz, because look what she says next. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So Naomi is suddenly remembering the law of Moses. The law of Moses lays out specifically the law of the kinsman redeemer. When a man had lost his inheritance, when a man had lost his freedom, when a man had lost whatever, the next of kin was responsible for redeeming that for him. May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness is not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So the barley harvest is in the spring, the wheat harvest is in the fall. She has gleaned in the fields of Boaz the entire harvest season, right? So he has provided for Naomi and Ruth the entire harvest season of that first year that they were back in the land of Israel. Because, as Boaz said, it's because you have sought refuge under the wings of Jehovah. That's why he has blessed her. That's why he took notice of her. And Boaz, being the godly man that he was, stepped up to be the protector and the provider. And ultimately, we see the redeemer of Naomi and Ruth. So, we'll get there. Chapter 4, chapter 3, we see that Naomi is the schemer who tries to do things her own way, but God stops her from doing things her own way and works it out his way. So, comments, questions, chapter 2, the book of Ruth. Beautiful book. But we see in it the fact that Boaz pours out abundant grace upon Ruth. Ruth has done nothing really to deserve it. She is a Moabite. She is an enemy of the nation of Israel. But because she has sought refuge under the wings of Jehovah, the God that Boaz serves, Boaz has stepped up to be her provider, her protector, and keep her safe from harm. So we'll pick up the story after the harvest at the threshing floor. Comments? Can anybody hear me?